The guards dragged through the dark hallways of prison. His feet scraped against the cold metal floor. His hands were bound behind his back with energy cuffs that burned his wrists. He did not fight. He did not scream. He simply watched everything around him with calm, careful eyes. Was not an ordinary prison. It floated in space, a moon that the Empire had turned into a place of suffering. The worst criminals in the galaxy came here. Most of them never left. The air smelled like rust and fear. The walls were black stone, carved from the moon itself. Strange lights flickered above, casting shadows that moved like living things. The two guards holding were soldiers. They stood twice as tall as him. Their skin was silver like polished metal. They had 4 arms and faces covered with dozens of small eyes. Those eyes looked at with disgust and amusement. "Small creature," one guard said. His voice sounded like stones grinding together. "You will not last long where we are taking you." Said nothing. He had learned long ago that words were wasted on those who had already made up their minds. They reached a massive door at the end of the hallway. The door was made of something stronger than steel. Warning symbols covered its surface in languages did not recognize, but he understood their meaning well enough. Danger, death, do not enter. The guard pressed his hand against a panel. The door groaned and began to open. Cold air rushed out, carrying a smell that made stomach tighten. It was the smell of old blood, of fear, of something ancient and hungry. Beyond the door was a pit. It dropped down into darkness, surrounded by high walls of smooth black stone. Far above could see windows made of thick glass. Behind those windows figures were gathering. Nobles in their fine robes, their many eyes glittering with excitement. They had come to watch. "Cell Block Omega," the guard announced with cruel pleasure. "Home of the Drake. 47 prisoners have entered this pit. None have survived longer than 3 minutes. He leaned close to his face. "The record is 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Try to beat it, human. Give us a good show." The other guard laughed. Then they threw into the pit. He fell for what felt like forever. The air rushed past him, cold and sharp. Then he hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through his body. He lay there for a moment, breathing, checking if anything was broken. His shoulder hurt badly. His lip was bleeding, but he could move. He was alive. Pushed himself up slowly. Dust rose around him, glowing faintly in the dim light that came from somewhere far above. The floor of the pit was covered with bones. Some were small. Some were very large. All of them had been cracked open, the marrow sucked out. He stood and looked around. The pit was larger than he had expected, perhaps 50 meters across. The walls rose up smooth and impossible to climb. There was no way out except through that door high above, and that door was now sealed shut. In the darkness at the far end of the pit, something moved. Heard it before he saw it. A sound like metal scraping against stone. A deep, slow breathing that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. 2 points of light appeared in the shadows, orange like dying coals. They were eyes. The Drake emerged from the darkness. Had seen pictures. He had read reports, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of this creature. It was enormous, 12 meters long at least, with a body like a serpent made of living armor. Its scales were black and red, shifting colors as it moved. Each scale was the size of his hand. Its head was triangular, filled with teeth that curved backward like hooks. 4 legs with claws that could tear through starship hulls. Wings folded against its back, useless in this confined space but still terrifying. The Drake opened its mouth and made a sound. Not a roar. Something worse. A sound that felt in his bones, in his blood, in the deepest part of his brain that still remembered what it meant to be prey. Above, the crowd pressed against the glass. They were shouting, placing bets, pointing at the small human standing alone in the pit. Could not hear their words, but he knew what they were saying. How long? How will he die? Will he run? Will he beg? The Drake moved closer. Its massive body slid across the bone-covered floor with terrible grace. Its eyes never left. Those eyes held no mercy, no curiosity, nothing but ancient hunger and endless rage. Took a deep breath. And then he smiled. It was not a desperate smile, not the false courage of a man who had given up hope. It was a calm smile, a knowing smile, the smile of someone who held a secret that no one else in the galaxy knew. The Drake paused. In 47 kills it had seen many reactions: fear, panic, frozen terror, desperate attacks, pathetic begging, but it had never seen this. Never seen prey that smiled at it like an old friend. The creature's head tilted slightly. A new sound came from its throat: confusion. Raised his hand slowly, showing he held no weapon. Not that a weapon would matter against a drake. Ships had been destroyed trying to kill these creatures. Armies had failed, but did not need a weapon. He needed something much simpler. Pursed his lips and began to whistle. The sound was high and clear. It echoed off the walls of the pit, bouncing and multiplying. It was a simple tune, nothing special, but the frequency was very specific. Had practiced this whistle for months. He had studied the exact pitch, the exact pattern, between 2.4 and 2.7 kilohertz, the most important sound in the galaxy, and no one knew it except him. The Drake froze. Its massive body went completely still. Its eyes, which had been filled with killing rage, suddenly changed. The pupils expanded. The orange glow softened. A new sound emerged from the creature's chest. Not a growl, not a threat, something else entirely. A whimper. Above, the crowd went silent. Warden pressed his face against the glass, his dozens of eyes wide with disbelief. This was impossible. This was not how prisoners died. This was not entertainment. The Drake lowered its head. Slowly, carefully, it moved toward, not to attack, not to kill. It moved the way a lost child moves toward a familiar voice. It moved the way something broken moves toward the possibility of being whole again. Kept whistling. He adjusted the pitch slightly, watching the creature's reactions. He saw the way its scales relaxed. He saw the way its claws retracted. He saw the way its terrible eyes filled with something that looked almost like hope. The Drake's head came to rest on the ground in front of. Its breath washed over him, hot and ancient. Up close, he could see the scars that covered its body. Old wounds, marks of capture, of torture, of endless fighting in this pit. Stopped whistling. He reached out his hand slowly and placed it on the Drake's snout. The creature closed its eyes. Above, Warden began to scream orders. Guards ran in different directions. The nobles backed away from the glass. Their excitement turned to fear. Something had gone very wrong with their entertainment. But did not care about them. He looked at the massive creature before him, this beast that the galaxy feared, this weapon of terror that had killed so many. "Hello," he said softly. "I know what you really are, and I know what you need." The Drake opened one eye and looked at him. In that eye, saw not a monster but a prisoner, just like him. He smiled again. "Let me tell you a secret," he whispered. "We are going to get out of here, both of us together." The Drake made a sound deep in its throat. It was not a roar or a growl. It was something very close to agreement. 3 years before the pit had been a different man. He had worn clean clothes instead of prison rags. He had walked through the halls of the Galactic Research Consortium with his head held high. He had been Doctor, the youngest ever to receive the Silver Star of Discovery, the man who studied monsters. His office had been small but filled with wonders. Jars containing specimens from 100 worlds. Holographic displays showing creatures that most people only saw in nightmares. Books and data tablets stacked in messy piles that only he understood. On his desk sat a small plant from Earth, a reminder of a home he had not seen in 15 years. Had never been good with people. He talked too little at parties. He asked strange questions that made others uncomfortable. He spent too much time thinking and not enough time making friends. But with creatures, with animals, with the beasts that others called monsters, he was different. He understood them in ways that no one else could. His colleagues called him the mad human. They meant it as an insult at first. Later, they meant it with respect, because did things that no sane researcher would do. He had spent 18 months on Seven, a death world where the rain could melt through metal. The creatures there produced acid in their bodies. They could dissolve a starship in hours. Every other research team had failed. Most had died, but had lived among those creatures, learned their patterns, earned their trust. He had discovered that they were not random killers. They were farmers, growing special plants in caves beneath the surface. The acid was just how they prepared their food. He had swum in the spawning pools of the leviathans, creatures the size of buildings that lived in the deep oceans of gas giants. Everyone said he would be crushed by the pressure or eaten alive. Instead, he had recorded their mating songs and learned that they were artists, creating patterns of light and sound that were more complex than any human symphony. He had done these things not because he was brave or stupid. He had done them because he believed something that most of the galaxy had forgotten. Every creature has a pattern. Every beast has a reason. Every monster is just an animal that no one has bothered to understand. This belief had made him famous. It had also made him enemies. The Empire did not like humans. They tolerated them because humans were useful, clever with technology, and stubborn enough to survive on worlds that killed other species. But they believed they were the masters of the galaxy. They believed that strength was the only thing that mattered, and they believed that some creatures were meant to be weapons, nothing more. The Drakes were their greatest weapons. First learned about the Drakes from a corrupted database that a friend had smuggled to him. The friend was a scientist named who disagreed with his empire's cruelty, had found old files, research from centuries ago, before they had turned the Drakes into instruments of terror. "You need to see this," had said, his many eyes dark with worry. "But if anyone finds out I gave this to you, we are both dead." Had taken the files. He had spent 3 months studying them in secret, translating ancient language, piecing together fragments of data that someone had tried very hard to destroy. What he found changed everything. The Drakes were not predators. They had never been predators. On their home world, they had been guardians. They lived in family groups of 20 or 30, protecting territories that contained something precious. The old files did not say what that precious thing was, but they made one thing very clear. The Drakes were parents, devoted, protective, loving parents. When hunters came to capture them, the Drakes fought not out of bloodlust but out of desperation. They were protecting their eggs, their young, their families. The hunters killed the adults and stole the eggs. They raised the baby Drakes in isolation, in darkness, in pain. They taught them that the universe was cruel and that everything was an enemy. The monsters that the galaxy feared were not born monsters. They were made, twisted by cruelty into shadows of what they should have been. But the deepest secret was hidden in a section of the files that had been heavily damaged. Had spent weeks recovering the data, working late into the night, ignoring meals and sleep. The Drakes communicated through sound, specific frequencies that were too high for ears to detect. The hatchlings made a particular call when they were scared or lost or needed protection. It was a sound that adult Drakes could not ignore. Hearing it triggered something deep in their brains, something stronger than rage, stronger than fear. The call meant, "Help me, parent. I am alone. I need you." And the frequency of that call was between 2.4 and 2.7 kilohertz. The exact range of a human whistle. Had sat in his office for a long time after discovering this. He had looked at the small Earth plan on his desk and thought about what this meant. Humans were the only species in the known galaxy that could naturally produce this sound. It was an accident of evolution, a coincidence that meant nothing to most people. But it meant everything. He had begun to practice. Every day for hours he worked on his whistle. He studied the exact patterns, the rises and falls that meant safety and trust in the Drake language. He learned to speak a language that had been silent for centuries. He told no one, not even the knowledge was too dangerous. But they found out anyway. They always found out. Never learned who betrayed him. One night, soldiers came to his quarters. They broke down his door, destroyed his research, killed his Earth plant. They dragged him before a military court and charged him with crimes against the Empire. "You have stolen sacred knowledge," the judge had said. "You have learned secrets that humans are not meant to know. For this, you will die, but not quickly. First, you will suffer you will learn what happens to those who challenge power." They had expected him to beg, to cry, to break. Instead had smiled. Because even as they dragged him away, even as they threw him in transport ships and sent him across the galaxy to the darkest prison in existence, he held onto his secret. The thought they were punishing him, they thought would destroy him. They did not know that held exactly what he needed. A drake, alone and suffering, waiting for someone who could speak its language. During the long journey to the prison moon, sat in his tiny cell and practiced his whistle. The guards thought he was going mad. Let them think it. Let them underestimate him. Let them believe that humans were just small, weak creatures meant for entertainment. Knew better, he knew that humans had something no other species possessed. Not strength, not technology, not numbers. Understanding. The ability to look at a monster and see a person. The patience to learn languages that others thought were just noise. The stubbornness to keep trying when everyone else gave up. This was humanity's true power, and was about to prove it. When the transport finally arrived when the guards opened his cell and prepared to throw him into the pit, took one last deep breath. "I am coming," he whispered in a language no could hear. "Do not be afraid, you are not alone anymore." Then they threw him into the darkness, and everything he had worked for finally began. The first night was the hardest. Sat with his back against the cold wall of the pit while the drake watched him from the shadows. She did not attack, but she did not come closer either. She was confused, uncertain, torn between ancient instincts and years of trained violence. Understood, trust could not be built in a moment, it had to be earned. He whistled softly through the night, simple patterns that meant peace and safety. Sometimes the drake responded with low sounds from deep in her chest. Sometimes she was silent, but she always watched him with those burning orange eyes. When morning came, or what passed for morning in this sunless pit, the guards threw down food. Raw meat for the drake. A small container of nutrient paste for. They also threw down water and watched through the glass above, waiting to see if today would be the day the human finally died. Ate slowly. He pushed half of his paste toward the drake. She looked at it with confusion. No prisoner had ever shared food with her before. After a long moment, she stretched out her neck and licked the container clean with a tongue the color of dark wine. "Good," said softly. "That is how trust begins. Small kindnesses, shared meals, time." The drake tilted her head at his voice. She did not understand his words, but she understood his tone. Gentle, patient, without fear. Days passed, then weeks. Learned the drake's rhythms. She slept in the darkest corner of the pit during what he guessed was afternoon. She paced the walls at night, her claws clicking against stone. She was most alert at dawn and dusk, times that probably meant something on her lost home world. He also learned her scars. There were many. Some were old and faded, marks from her first capture centuries ago. Some were newer, wounds from fighting prisoners or from punishments the guards had given her. On her left side near her heart was the worst scar. It was shaped like a brand, burned deep into her scales, the symbol of the Empire. They had marked her, claimed her, turned her into property. When first touched that scar, the drake flinched. A growl built in her throat, old memories of pain rising to the surface, but kept his hand still. He began to whistle the safety song he had practiced so many times. Slowly, so slowly, the growl faded. "I am sorry," said. "I am so sorry for what they did to you." The drake could not understand his words, but she understood his sorrow. She lowered her head and pressed her snout against his chest. Her breath was warm. Her scales were rough but not. In that moment, gave her a name. It was a Korean word from Earth, his grandmother's language. It meant hidden beauty, because that is what saw when he looked at this creature. Not a monster, not a weapon, a being of terrible beauty that the galaxy had tried to destroy but could not. He said, and she lifted her head at the sound. That is your name now, not Drake, not beast, not prisoner. She made a sound he had never heard before. It was soft and questioning, like she was trying to repeat the word. Above, the watching crowds grew bored. Day after day, no one died. The human and the drake simply existed together. The nobles stopped coming. The betting stopped. Warden grew angry, but there was nothing he could do. The drake would not attack, and executing the human directly would be admitting defeat. But something else was happening, something they did not notice. Was watching them too. Every guard who came to throw down food, every patrol that walked past the pit, every shift change and every gap in security. He stored this information in his mind, building a map of the prison that no one knew he was making. He also noticed the ventilation shafts. They were old, built when the prison was first carved from the moon. Most were too small for it to fit through, but was human. Humans were small, and despite her size, was serpentine. Her kind could compress their bodies to fit through spaces that seemed impossible. One night, when the pit was at its darkest, pressed his hand against neck and pointed toward a great high on the wall. "Do you see that?" he whispered. "That is our door. When the time comes, we are going through there." Followed his gaze. She made a low sound, not understanding but willing to trust. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Learned to read her moods from the color of her scales. Dark red meant agitation. Deep black meant calm. A shimmer of purple meant she was happy, though she seemed surprised each time she felt it, as if happiness was something she had forgotten was possible. She learned his patterns too. She knew when he needed sleep and would curl around him to keep him warm. She knew when he was sad and would press her head against him in silent comfort. She knew when he was planning something and would watch the guards with the same careful attention he did. They became a family of two, the last human and the last drake, both prisoners, both survivors, both waiting for the right moment. That moment came 63 days after first fell into the pit. He was asleep, curled against warm scales, when a sound woke him. Not the usual sounds of the prison, something different. Voices raised in anger, running footsteps, alarms. Sat up. Above, through the observation glass, he could see chaos. Guards were rushing somewhere. The lights were flickering. Something had gone wrong in the prison, something big. And then he heard another sound, a human voice, a woman screaming words he could barely make out. "All the cells, override, now." A crash, more alarms. And then, impossibly, the massive door to the pit began to open. Looked at, she was already on her feet, her scales shifting to battle-ready black, her eyes glowing bright orange. But she did not attack the opening door. She looked at and waited. "This is it," he said. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "This is our chance. Whatever is happening up there, we need to use it." He climbed onto her back. He had done this before, during quiet nights when they practiced moving together. She was faster than any ship, stronger than any machine, and she had been waiting for this moment just as long as he had. Launched herself toward the door. Her claws found grip on the smooth walls that no prisoner had ever been able to climb. She moved like water, like shadow, like something out of a nightmare. But she was not a nightmare anymore. She was his partner, his friend, his family. Together they rose out of the pit and into the chaos above. The prison was burning, not with fire but with rebellion. Cell doors hung open everywhere. Prisoners of a dozen species were fighting guards in the corridors. Someone had taken control of the security systems and was using them against the In the middle of it all stood a human woman. She was small-like, with short black hair and eyes full of fierce determination. She held a tablet in her hands, her fingers flying across the screen as she directed the prison's own systems against itself. She looked up and saw a man riding a dragon through the smoke. For a moment she just stared. Then she smiled, wide and wild and full of hope. "I am," she shouted over the noise. "I am the one who opened the doors, and I think we should probably get out of here together." Smiled back. "I am this is, and I think you are absolutely right." Behind them, the prison continued to fall. Ahead of them, freedom waited. Had been a prisoner for 2 years. Her crime was simple. She had built a device that let poor colonists communicate without paying the fees that the Empire demanded. Free information for free people. The Empire called it technological sedition. The colonists called it hope. They had taken everything from her. Her work, her freedom, her belief that things could ever get better. They had put her in the prison's engineering section, forcing her to maintain the systems that kept thousands of prisoners trapped. They thought they were punishing her. They did not realize they were giving her the keys to their own destruction. For 2 years had studied every system in the power grid, the security networks, the ventilation, the cell locks. She had found weaknesses that they had forgotten existed. She had written codes that sat dormant in the system, waiting for the right moment. That moment came when Warden made a mistake. He had grown angry about the situation in cell block Omega. The human who should have died was still alive. The Drake that should have been a weapon had become a pet. His superiors in the Empire were asking questions. His reputation was suffering. So decided to end it. He ordered the pit flooded with neurotoxin, enough to kill both the human and the Drake. He would report it as an accident. No one would care about one dead prisoner and one dead beast. But was monitoring the systems when the order came through. She saw the neurotoxin being prepared. She saw the target location, and she made a choice that changed everything. She had heard stories about the man in the pit. Prisoners whispered about him, a human who had tamed a dragon, a small man who smiled in the face of death. She did not know if the stories were true, but she knew that she could not let them murder him in secret. Her fingers moved across her tablet. 2 years of preparation activated in seconds. Cell doors opened throughout the prison. Security systems crashed. Emergency lights filled the corridors with red warning glow. The neurotoxin vents sealed themselves shut. And then she opened the door to cell block Omega. Now she stood in a burning corridor, watching a man ride a dragon toward her, and she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. "We need to reach the command center," said Azin reached her position. That is where we can take control of the entire prison." Nodded. Around them the chaos continued. Prisoners fought guards. Fires burned. The sounds of combat echoed through the metal halls, but moved through it all like a ghost, too fast for anyone to stop, too terrifying for anyone to challenge. "How many prisoners are with us?" asked. "I do not know exactly. Maybe 1,000, maybe more. I opened every cell I could." Climbed up behind On's back. The Drake made a questioning sound but did not object. "They have about 300 guards, but they have weapons, armor, training." "And we have a dragon," said. Made a sound that might have been laughter. They moved through the prison like a storm, gave directions while guided with whistles and gentle touches. Guards who tried to stop them were knocked aside by his tail or scattered by her roar. She did not kill unless she had to. That was not what she was anymore. But she was still terrifying, and terror was a weapon all its own. Other prisoners saw them and followed. A warrior from the system with 4 arms and scars covering his gray skin. A small creature from a world did not recognize, moving on 6 legs and carrying a stolen weapon. More humans, 7 of them, who had been captured from colony worlds and brought here to suffer. By the time they reached the command center, they had an army. The doors to the command center were sealed. heavy blast doors designed to survive anything. Behind them, Warden and his remaining officers had taken shelter, believing they were safe. Dismounted from his back, he walked to the doors and placed his hand against the cold metal. He called out, "Can you hear me? This is the human from the pit, the one you tried to kill." Silence. Then a voice came through the intercom, shaking with anger and fear. "You cannot get through these doors. They are indestructible. When reinforcements arrive from the Empire, you will all die slowly. I will make sure of it." She looked back at him with her burning orange eyes. He said, "These are the people who took you from your home. These are the people who burned their mark into your skin. These are the people who kept you in that pit for centuries." Her scales shifted to deep red. A growl built in her chest. "Show them what you can really do." Reared back, her chest expanded. Something glowed deep within her, visible through the gaps in her scales, and then she opened her mouth. The fire that came out was not ordinary fire. It was plasma, hotter than the surface of a star, focused into a stream that hit the blast doors like the anger of a god. The metal did not melt. It simply ceased to exist. It became gas, became light, became nothing. When closed her mouth, there was a hole in the doors large enough for 10 soldiers to walk through. Stood on the other side, his silver skin pale with terror, his many eyes wide with disbelief. His officers had already dropped their weapons. Some were running for exits that no longer existed. Walked through the hole, his clothes were singed, his hair was wild, but his smile was calm and certain. "You made a mistake," he said to. "You thought was a weapon, something to be used, something to be controlled." He stopped in front of the warden. Behind him, prisoners poured through the opening, humans and aliens together, all of them watching. "She is not a weapon, she is a person. She has feelings and memories and hopes. She had a family once before your empire stole her away." Tried to speak, but no words came out. "And she is not the only one," continued. "Every creature your empire calls a monster, every beast you keep in cages and pits, every weapon you think you control, they are all persons, and persons eventually fight back." Moved to the main control panel. Her fingers danced across the screens. One by one, systems came under her control: life support, communications, the shuttle bay, everything. "The prison is ours," she announced, "all of it." Looked at one last time. "You are going to live," he said. "I want you to go back to your empire. I want you to tell them what happened here. Tell them that a human and a dragon took your prison. Tell them that understanding is more powerful than fear." He turned away from the warden and walked too. She lowered her head and he pressed his forehead against hers. Her scales were still warm from the fire she had breathed. "Thank you," he whispered. "We are free now." She made a sound, soft and content, the first truly peaceful sound she had made in centuries. Behind them, prisoners cheered. Outside the observation windows, the cold stars of space watched in silence. And somewhere far away, the Empire began to realize that everything was about to change. Walked over to stand beside. "What do we do now?" she asked. Looked at the communication systems. He looked at the prisoners who had followed him. He looked at his partner, his friend, his family. "Now," he said, "we send a message." The message went out across every frequency that communication systems could reach. It traveled at the speed of light, spreading through space like ripples in dark water. Colony worlds heard it first, then trading stations, then the great cities of the inner systems, and finally the capital of the empire itself. Stood in the command center, surrounded by freed prisoners and the soft glow of display screens. Lay coiled around the room's perimeter, her head resting near his feet. Worked at the main console, making sure the signal stayed strong and clear. "This is Prison Moon," spoke into the broadcast system. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of everything they had survived. "We are under new management now. Free management." Across the galaxy, Millions of beings stopped what they were doing to listen. My name is I am human. 3 years ago, the Empire imprisoned me for learning the truth about the creatures they call weapons. Today, I stand beside one of those creatures. She is a drake, and she is my friend. In the capital, military commanders scrambled to respond. In colony worlds, oppressed peoples gathered around screens and speakers. In research stations and trading posts and ships flying through the void, everyone listened. The Empire told you that drakes are monsters, mindless beasts, killing machines. They lied. Paused, letting the words sink in. The drakes are guardians, parents, intelligent beings who were stolen from their homes and twisted by cruelty into shadows of themselves. Raised her head slightly. Her orange eyes found face. She did not understand every word, but she understood that something important was happening, something that had needed to happen for a very long time. The Empire lies about many things, continued. They call species monsters when those species simply will not obey. They call behavior savage when it is just different from their own. They build prisons and fighting pits and death camps, and they tell themselves they are bringing order to the galaxy. Looked up from her console and gave a small nod. The signal was reaching everywhere, even places they had not expected. The galaxy was listening. But here is the truth the Empire does not want you to know. Every creature, no matter how strange or frightening, has a pattern. Every beast has a reason for what it does. Every monster is just a being that no one has bothered to understand. Thought about his life, the death worlds he had visited, the creatures he had studied, the endless hours of patience and observation and careful work. All of it had led to this moment. Humanity has a gift, he said, not strength. They are stronger, not technology. Many species are more advanced. Our gift is empathy, understanding, the stubborn, foolish belief that even the most terrifying creature might become a friend if we just take the time to learn its language. He reached down and placed his hand on his head. She pressed into his touch, her scales warm and alive. Today, we took this prison not with weapons or armies or superior force. We took it with understanding, a human and a dragon working together, communicating, trusting each other. The military was already preparing a response fleet. Knew this. He had perhaps days before ships arrived to retake, but the message would outlast any fleet. Words once spoken could not be unspoken. To the Empire we say this: your weapons are not weapons. Your monsters are not monsters. They are persons with their own lives, their own feelings, their own right to exist, and they will not serve you forever. To everyone else in the galaxy we say this: join us, not for war, not for conquest. Join us in understanding. Help us learn the languages of those you fear. Help us build bridges instead of cages. Help us create a galaxy where nothing has to be alone. Took a deep breath. The final words had to be perfect. There is an old human saying: there are no dangerous animals, only animals that have not met the right human yet. I believe this is true for all beings, for drakes and leviathans and every creature the Empire has called a monster. Today we prove it. The broadcast ended. Silence filled the command center. Then slowly the prisoners began to cheer. Not just humans, the four-armed warrior, the six-legged creature, species that had been enemies in their cells now standing together, united by hope. What followed was harder than the uprising. Building something always is. And worked without sleep for days. They organized the prisoners into teams. Engineers repaired the damage from the fighting. Medical personnel cared for the wounded. Warriors prepared defenses for the attack they knew was coming. And researchers, gathered from half a dozen species, began the real work: understanding. They started with, taught them the basics of drake communication. The whistles, the postures, the subtle color changes that indicated mood. It was slow work. Many did not believe it at first. But when they saw respond, when they watched a creature that could melt starships gently nuzzle against the side, belief came quickly. The first ships arrived 7 days after the uprising. 3 battle cruisers, enough firepower to reduce to dust. They demanded immediate surrender. Answered them with at his side. You could destroy this moon, he agreed. You could kill everyone here, but you cannot kill what we have started. The message is already out. Beings across the galaxy have heard it. They are already looking at the monsters in their own worlds with new eyes. They are already asking questions you cannot answer. The ships did not fire. They could not while the entire galaxy watched. Destroying a moon full of prisoners would confirm everything had said about the Empire. After 3 days, the ships. News spread, the story of became legend, the human who tamed a dragon, the prisoners who took their prison, the message that challenged an empire. Other species began reaching out. A research team from a world called Heron came to study Drake communication. A group of human colonists arrived with supplies and volunteers. Even some scientists, ones who had always doubted their empire's teachings, made secret contact. The compact was born, not a government, not an army, but an agreement, a promise to understand before fearing, to communicate before fighting, to see persons where others saw only monsters. Within a year, it had become the fastest-growing alliance in the outer systems. Stood on an observation deck looking out at the stars. Lay behind him, her massive form filling most of the room. She was content now. She had other drakes to speak with, rescued from other facilities. She had a purpose beyond survival. She had family. Walked in and stood beside him. The delegation from 7 is arriving tomorrow, she said. The creatures there want to talk. They heard about what happened here and they want to know if understanding is possible for them too. Smiled. 7. The death world where he had lived for 18 months, studying creatures that could melt metal with their spit. Coming to him now, not as subjects of research but as potential partners. Understanding is always possible, he said. It just takes patience and the willingness to listen. Made a sound behind him, a soft, rumbling note that he had learned meant agreement. He turned to look at her, at this creature of terror and beauty, this being that had been alone for so long and was alone no longer. She looked back at him with eyes that held no rage anymore, only warmth. Thank you, said to her, for trusting me, for giving me a chance to prove what I believed. She lowered her head and pressed it against his chest, the same gesture she had made that first night in the pit. But now it meant something different, not the desperate hope of a prisoner, the comfortable affection of family. Watched them with a soft smile. You really did change everything, she said. 1 human and 1 dragon against an empire, and you won. Shook his head. We did not win against the empire. We won against fear, against the lie that strength is all that matters, against centuries of loneliness and cruelty. He looked back out at the stars, at the vast galaxy waiting to be understood. The empire will fall eventually. All empires do. But what we built here, this belief that understanding is possible, that will last forever. Made another sound. The note meant hope. Placed his hand on her scales one more time. Come on, he said. We have more work to do, more beings to understand, more bridges to build. He walked toward the door and his dragon followed. Behind them, the stars watched in silence. And across the galaxy, in cages and pits and dark places where monsters waited, something was changing. A whisper was spreading. A hope was growing. Understanding was coming. And humanity was leading the way.